Good evening and welcome to the Fourth Estate. It's just now a week after the presidential elections, but the local council election results happened also during the week. And this week we want to discuss on the Fourth Estate what has happened to the nationalist movement in Buganda, but also most importantly, what has happened to the nationalist movement support in other regions of the country. And to discuss with me, I have a very elite panel here. Timothy Kalyegira, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you. Good evening, viewers.
You were telling us earlier that you were jolly and happy about the outcome of all the results generally.
What we discuss off air shouldn't come on air. But since you brought it on
We can't
air,
sense ourselves on the
but since you brought it on air, yes, I would be a hypocrite to pretend I'm not pleased by the thumping of the NRM in Uganda. Nothing personal, just quiet pleasure.
We also have Tabalanga, who is my political lecturer at the Uganda Christian University in political science. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
I think the last time we had you, there was a crisis on international relations, whether we would have election observers or not.
And of course, we didn't have them. And I don't know whether it played in the hand well for the NRM or for the other parties, but of course, there was resistance from within the NRM to have the election observers come and witness what we're doing here. That is not a very good thing, though. But of course, we had the elections and we know the results. And we can move on as a country.
We'll discuss the results thereafter. We have Nicholas Sengova, who's a columnist with the Daily Monitor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, and thank you for having me here.
This is the first time we're having you, so we are very glad to have you. We are going to act very well to you so that you can return to the show.
The first time you're having me as the moderator?
Yes, definitely. But Nicholas, let me start with you. We've just seen the map of the outcome of presidential results. Not very different from the outcome of the local council results. Buganda region shifting completely now to the opposition. The opposition putting up a fight in the eastern part of Uganda, but the NRM taking the size chunk of the northern Uganda and the western Uganda giving a block vote to the NRM. Some people have said this is a Buganda question. This is not a question of all the other regions. How would you interpret the outcome of these results?
Well, thank you very much. I'm very, very uncomfortable with the way it has been framed as a Buganda question. My belief is that the people who have, especially from within the NRM camp, who are purveying this argument about what has happened in Buganda as a consequence of tribalism, are trying to trivialize the real issues behind the vote, you know? Because I don't think there was anything deliberate from the side, especially of the NUP, to go with the issue of tribe as, you know, the main driving factor, you know. What is very important is that from the way I have always observed the NRM and what is happening within the media, is that there's a tendency within the NRM to frame the media agenda. And the problem is that the media just simply reports. This is what they said, this is what happened. And so when the issue of tribalism comes up, then now we are arguing about that. It masks so many things. One, that you did not really have a good election. It was a bad election, you know, for all intents and purposes. Secondly, the people who voted with NUP or whoever the country had have real genuine issues. In the central region, for instance, you have a problem of unemployment, you know. There are very many young people who are within that bracket of less than $1 a day, and they don't see a lot of hope, you know. And yet, what NRM is marketing, has been marketing, is we saved you from dictators. But people are now talking about bread and butter issues. And the demographics, if you look at it, many of these young people are not part of that history. They don't really know much about that. They are now thinking about what do they put on the plate? How do they save their own parents? You have a problem here of rural-urban migration, the urban poor, coming as a consequence of, you know, all this land grabbing and people being pushed out of their land, you know. Parents actually sell land to educate their children. The children go through school, get no jobs. So it just keeps piling up the number of people. And when people go to school, their expectations rise, you know. So now, if you come and you cannot answer those questions, you're going to have a problem. But having said that, there's an unintended consequence in this. I don't know if I'm moving too fast, but if you're going to keep pushing the argument that people voted as a tribal bloc, and the people who are going to look at it and say, but wait and see, let's see, we did this and nothing happened, then it's something we can keep doing, you know? It can happen, you know? So that is really my reading of it.
Jonathan, and from a political science perspective, the nationalist movement has had their worst election by percentage in their history. This is the worst Museveni has performed by percentage in history. But equally, they've lost the heart of support. They were midwifed in Luwero. They've lost Luwero at all elections. And is it a machination from the NRM to make this a tribal question, or is it actually their genuine concerns that these people in Luwero and in the Buganda and in the central region that people were raising and the NRM wasn't responding to them with their campaign?
First of all, I think I need to ask maybe you a question. What is the composition of the citizens of Buganda in terms of tribe? Does it mean that everyone who resides in Uganda is a Muganda, therefore also voted for the NRM, or they voted for the NUP? Because if you look at 60, is it 64% in Buganda?
Yes.
For me, I think, just like my colleague has argued, that problems, governance problems, and we've seen over time that most of these people in Buganda, especially the ones who are in government, ministers and the other officials, have gotten arrogant. And the way when they have this mandate to go and actually tell the people what is supposed to be done, we've over time seen them, instead of actually delivering, they focus on one thing, self-interest. I've told you before that we had someone in Bamnanika who told voters, don't vote for me if you're not voting for the president. But I mean, your political career does not depend on one person. It depends on you yourself as a person. Because we know this guy has worked, and we know he's productive.
This is Chrysostom Muyingo.
Yes, but then for you, you attach your political career to another person. Because you see, the problems of the president are many. But of course, the president does not work in a vacuum himself. He has people. Of course, these people come up and they're given mandates. But also, when I was in Luwero a few weeks ago, I was asking people, what was the reason why you actually went this side and not, because we know that Luwero has been
the heartline.
It has actually called the Mecca of NRM, because they house the NRA, and of course, we know that those people have been voting overwhelmingly for the national resistance movement. But this time around, someone told me that when they went to Gulu and realized that Gulu has actually devolved more than Luwero, and yet Gulu was infested with conflict for a long time, okay? It means that people are actually concerned. People have traveled. People know the problems of their constituency. And when you have ministers, strong ministers actually, we have Saida Bumba, we had Naduli, we've had now Muyingo. These guys are coming from this region, but what have they done for the people themselves? What have they sourced from the government, from the national treasury? Have they done anything for the people? I don't think so. So you have this question of then the central region, not Luwero, but I mean Kampala and the surrounding areas. We know that in Kampala and other places surrounding the city, it is a place where people get information firsthand. Any mistake made by any government official, or even government itself, people know. So you're not going to lie to them that this was a mistake. And of course, we know things happening in the police. The police misbehaving, the army coming in and beating up people, the land grabbing, the corruption within the system. These are things that you need to deal with. But I mean, the question should be, can they rectify this?
In the coming 5 years?
In the coming 5 years.
I want to bring in Timothy. Jonathan raises an important point on the multi-ethnicity within Buganda. It's probably the most multi-ethnic of the regions. You have rural to urban migration where people come and stay here. And I wouldn't be shocked that many of the voters in Kampala might actually not be ethnic Baganda, but they've decided that, you know, the government of the day is not the one that they want. Timothy, is this a crisis for the NRM, or it's all governments are not voted in the capital cities where they sit?
Of course it's a crisis for the NRM. What puzzles me is that we actually even discussing this. That it's become a whole topic since the 16th or whichever of January, that it's become the topic. Why did Buganda not vote for them? What did you want them to vote? what did you want? So you wanted them to win like all 4 regions? You wanted to be what, one of these, what is these 98% Hosni Mubarak and whatnot? And then the obvious and glaring fact that in Western Uganda, Museveni really is just sweeping entire places. And you can say that in Buganda, even if he was beaten by Bobby Wine, it really was it roughly 1.6 million votes to 1 million? In other words, the thought that we're even discussing this with an accusatory tone, that it's become the topic. Every single radio station you listen to, every forum you get to, it's all why did Buganda for this sweep. But 3/4 of the country voted for you, 1/4 did not. Why can't you take that? Well, you remember that when we were here discussing the day the results were coming out, were being announced after that Saturday, and you asked me what I would tell the president if he, you know, if I would see him. And you remember the prediction I said he's going to come out, quarrel, shout at everybody, which is what he did that night. You just say, but it's your victory. You're the bride. It's bridegroom. It's your day. Why are you blasting the video people, the bridesmaids, the people who made the cake? Why aren't you happy? So, like I say, why all this? Why did Buganda not vote NRM? So that almost gives you that sense, that grudging admission that, as you said earlier today in a text to me, 72% of the economy is in the central region. Now, of course, if you go and widen the central region to include the east central part that spreads up to Busoga, apart from the Karuma Dam and 1 or 2 of these, you know, Pepsi, you know, Coca-Cola, Nilebreweries factories in Barara, everything else is in this place. All your shopping centers, all your main TV stations, the head office of virtually every company in Uganda except maybe the cement factories in Tororo and Hima, all the happening nightclubs, all the top schools, all the high-rise buildings. If you add now to this place we call Buganda, add to that Jinja, the new bridge, all these things that in the last several months the NRM social media influencers have been showing us. You see securing a future, you see the new airport, you see the Airbus, you see this, you see that bridge in Jinja, you see Simba Dam, you see that, it's all in that area. So now, yes, you must admit, like I've been saying over and over again, whether it was here or KFM, whenever a central government loses the support of Buganda, the country immediately goes into a political crisis. It started in the 1940s with those Augustine Kamias, the African, farmers, I don't know, Union, African Taxi Driver Association, the strikes of 1945, 1949, the deportation of the Kabaka, Edward Mutesa to England, 1953, 1966, the attack on Oluwiri, then after the brief honeymoon with Idi Amin, the latter half of the 1970s, the removal of Yusuf Lay after 68 days, and the rioting in Kampala and Entebbe, the grudging acceptance of the Benaisa presidency, the grudging acceptance of Paulo Mwanga's brief tenure, of course what he knows of Obote too, then the 6 months of Tito Kello, all that. Once Buganda, it's stepped on, it's used to being this thing everybody slaps, you know, and uses to rise up to power. But when one day, after this long-suffering thing called Buganda rises up, gets the saucepan and just pours the contents to the ground, you're in a crisis, and you can see even the NRM hasn't survived it. So that's why rather than say, hey, thank you, Western Uganda, hey, Northern Uganda, you know, we're going to do some bull roasting when I come there. It's like, why did Buganda not vote the NRM? So it's an admission of where the true center of political power, cultural stimulation, all these football clubs, most of the musicians, everything that's Uganda really, it's just as I say, if you combine that with the plantation agriculture of Jinja, Kakira, the sugar works, the Owen Falls Dam, the factories there, we're talking not 72%, but we're saying about 80% of Uganda's economy is in the areas that voted red. It's a terrible thing to be, because even if you won 100% in Western Uganda, you still must drive back and sit in Kampala. You're around hostile people. And of course, what's making it worse is the fact that the voting, the second round, if the first round was an accident, the second round reinforced. It's like, no, we went Entebbe. 3 NRM people won these local elections on Wednesday. The rest, red. Masaka, red. Kampala, out of 44,
41,
41
red, yes.
all red. It's Luwero. It's just that, I mean, even on, I think it was the Thursday, this Seginya Mohammed of Wempe North was on Spark TV. I don't know if it's on the breakfast show. He gets into this sarcasm that, well, that is typical Seginya Mohammed. And says, you know, I got so many votes, I'm feeling guilty. And on Monday, I want to go and petition the Electoral Commission to distribute a few of my votes to those I beat. No, to just seem democratic. So, yes, it's that thorough thing. And I think what's most scary is if you try and make this thing seem like ethnic, which of course it isn't, it's that there's a calculating side to the voters in this. To them, it's more like the default, the factory settings are vote NUP, except otherwise stated. The otherwise stated is, unless it's Mahaban and Sereko, Kampala Central, or areas Lukwago, or as I think tomorrow it's going to be Joyce, Sebugwao, or Brenda Nabukenya in Luwero. In other words, they're choosy about the non-NUP people they vote, and those non-NUP people are virtually the same side of the story, all opposition. So in other words, it shows people did think through this, and I think that's really unsettled this government, because it's one thing to have this image of NUP. Remember these people mocking the NUP? You can only win in Kamacha. That's why they got all the full figures and whatnot. Now you begin to think, had this campaign gone on for 2 more months, they'd have added the entire Busoga to that and began to add some of the Bantu-speaking parts of Eastern Uganda, the Busias, the parts of Bugere, the Palisas, and parts of Bugisu. It's a scary wave. But I'm happy.
You haven't really hidden your happiness. Nicholas,
I'll explain to you before the end of the show why I'm happy.
Nicholas, the civilization Buganda existed before the entity Uganda happened. So there's many people saying this is not a Buganda question, this is a Uganda question. Uganda is very much a colonial state. The NRM hasn't reimagined it different, and the crisis of Buganda within Uganda still happens. Jonathan just told you that people in Luwero are saying, we see development happening in other places, development is not happening here. And yet, going into this election, the NRM actually bragged that they'd done their best development ever in these 5 years of the president. Roads, dams, and the like. Why wasn't this appreciated in the Mecca, their political Mecca?
Well, 2 things. One, in the political Mecca, you have had a period of, say, 20, 30 years where you have done the basics, roads, schools, and so on. It may not be to the greatest of heights, you know, but the fact that you've done it, how much more do you need to add, you know, to convince people that they're moving on, they're moving forward? That's one of those things that you get to a certain level. Especially now, if you look, say, in countries, like, there are many people who leave Africa and go to America and say, but how do people vote out a government here? The trains work, the planes work, there are hospitals, they just don't understand, you know? But because you get to a certain level whereby now the demands go much higher than that. Now, in places like this, we are now beyond that issue of, in some places you need roads, but we are now beyond that. Now we need a hospital where you can go and get treatment, you get an operation, you get an, you know, we have moved, you know, the demands are increasing. And with all this information, ICT, social media, and so on and so forth, like I said, people have been through school, UP, USC, and so on. The demands, the expectations are much, much higher. You can no longer give them the story of, you know, this place was so badly off and we liberated it. That's one of the biggest challenges I think the NRM has had. All these people have been saying, don't vote NUP because you will take us to the bad old days. And people are saying, which are the bad old days? The demographics have changed. You have many of these, the voters this time were very, very young people, first-time voters and so on and so forth. And Robert captured their imagination, you know? And even if he did not capture their imagination, there's also the element of protest, you know. You feel really, we have had this and we don't see much changing, so why don't we try something else? So now, the issue of what the NRM could have done even better is now where the challenge is. You have done, yes, but what can you do better? You know, because if you say we have all these health center fours, we have all, but some of these places have now become hospices, you know. You go and people are complaining, you don't have basic drugs, you don't have water, you don't have, you know. There's a gentleman who was speaking about, he's very good at the history of Luwero. I think he's called Mukuba Biasi, you know.
Yes, Mukuba Biasi. He's a researcher.
He's a researcher. He says that, you see, the hospital, I think in Nakaseke, during the years of the war, it had medicine, water, and electricity. Now, in the days of peace, it does not have water, you know. So these are some of the pertinent issues that many people are not looking at, and they're just busy inciting, you know, that this is tribal, I want to tell you, going forward, if the NRM does not really get down, brainstorm, think about this thing very, very critically, you know, and approach it, face the truth, then you are going to have it will be worse for the people who will succeed Museveni in 2026.
Are there people succeeding Museveni in 2026?
I want to see what
let us take a break, but when we come back, we'll start with Tim's thoughts on that. Let's take a very quick break, but we'll get back with the fourth estate. Thank you so much for watching The Fourth Estate and coming back with us. Before we broke off, we were discussing the Buganda Uganda question. And Tim, you had some pertinent thoughts.
And my point was, it's a pity the media has got into this. Buganda voted some way. Like I said, it's a central Uganda thing, but as you rightly said, and as you did say, Jonathan, there are about, I think someone mentioned a figure, there are about 10 million people who reside in this geographical terrain called Buganda, of which there are Somalis, South Sudanese, Indians, Chinese, you know, all tribes of Uganda, Kikuyu, and so on. So of the number that voted, obviously we take it that a substantial part of Buganda voted NUP, but also remember so many of the voters, as you just said, were non-Buganda. So in other words, what Buganda has become, which is why it's an uncomfortable thing for the NRM, it's become a microcosm of essentially the future that stares the NRM in the face. It's a combination of Ugandans from all walks of life. It's telling you that basically Buganda has just become the first stage, the first fruits of what's going to roll out eventually. And I think then, of course, looking much further in the future, for a certain president who has his illusions about being, I think, the leader of the East African Federation, it should tell him that if the most urbanized part of Uganda can reject you this much and this consistently, imagine what's going to happen when you get to Kenya that has more cities and larger towns than Uganda. In other words, this story of yours that's, where we fought and all this, you can only win in rural areas of Uganda.
But Timothy, you've been in the newsroom before. There are editors who are looking at the election results now, wondering, what do these trends say? And that's the context that the media has lacked all through this week, trying to make sense of what does this block vote in central Uganda mean?
The block vote, as we say, it's not, okay, yes, in a generic sense, when you look at it, you can start with Buganda as the most obvious thing and ignore the uncomfortable fact that all across Mayuge, Bujiri, Kamuli, and those places, Buyende, you see where in the last election, where President Museveni would have got, let's say, 80,000 votes, it now drops to 20,000. Where he got, let's say, 65,000, he now gets like 30,000. I mean, heavy losses, even the places where the NRM sort of clung to some degree. In other words, that's why I say, had this election been extended by a few months because of the corona outbreak, if we had been voting like around May, all of Busoga, or at least 90% of Busoga, or at least 40% more than voted for Museveni would have voted for Bobby Wine. So it's now a fact. And as I said, the common thing is, one, most of the country's infrastructure, all the, essentially the heart of government, business, culture, sports, music, and all that is here. Two, a very, very important fact, over the last decade and maybe a half, I think, if I'm not mistaken, apart from parts of Arua and maybe Yumbe, the largest concentration of Uganda's Muslim population is also in Buganda and Busoga. So in other words, away from the general fact of people are disgruntled, unemployment and all these things and the higher expectations, Muslims of Uganda, who are about 12 or 13% of the population, have gone through so much pain. They're always the first to be arrested, trumped up charges. It's the series of murders of many of their sheikhs. The whole humiliation that the Islamic community in Uganda feels they've gone through. Now that too obviously voted. So in other words, they have a party that's they symbolically attached to called JEMA, but now NUP becomes sort of like a broader, more active JEMA. So if you think, let's not forget that one fact called the Muslim vote. As Iganga, Buganda, and maybe as I say, apart from parts of Bugisu, Yumbe, Arua, must be about 70% of Ugandans Muslim in this place. So at the end of the day, it's a general protest vote. And the person who captured it best, without sounding academic, was Amelia Chambade. She just said, people, why can't we just accept people are just tired of us?
Yes.
As simple as that.
Jonathan, if you are the chief executive of Uganda and knowing what happened to Obote after the 1966 crisis, how would you manage? What kind of political management tools do we imagine the president will employ now that he's lost Buganda?
First of all, there's something I needed to talk about before we go to you giving me that position of being the executive of this country.
Yes.
But I need to tell you that during the crisis, the COVID pandemic, when Ugandans were in a lockdown, it exposed this government and government officials to the corruption, because you have people who depend on $1 a day. Someone is very comfortable with that 20,000 they receive every day, or 10,000, and they go back home. And then you put them in a lockdown. They expect food from government. They see that people have been collecting food and handing it to government, but then they do not receive this food. And remember, it happens during this period when we are preparing for the election. Now, that was a disaster. It was a disaster for the ruling party because we know what happened. We know how people are still sentimental about the issue of government not delivering aid to them. And then they decided that when we go to 2021, we shall do this government justice. And indeed, because the people living outside the Buganda region could go to the garden and get food. Now, you have a number of people down here who cannot even, Anyway, back to the question, the president has a lot of challenges. And these challenges, first of all, governance. You have 25 ministers who have been now voted out. It means they do not have a constituency. Now, how do you now get people who are going to be representative of this same region that has really given you a bashing in terms of
the vote patterns?
The vote patterns. That is going to be a challenge. I don't know whether he's going now to go and try and hunt from the opposition as he always does, and I expect a few people to get into the NRM. I don't know whether it will be easy for him because these people seem to be so attached to the NUP, unlike the people from DP and people from UPC. If you look at guys who have been voted into parliament from this same region, I mean, I don't know how the president is going to be able to get them on board to manage with him this country. That is one of the problems. Because now, do you now mean that you don't have anyone going to represent Buganda or the region in cabinet? That is a challenge, a very big challenge for him. Because, and the idea that he and others now talking about sectarianism, it's not a very good thing. Because now you need to appease everybody.
He has to act more.
Yes.
Nicholas, the president in his speech, the victory speech, which Timothy says was more of complaining, somewhere at the end of the victory speech, he said he's ready for dialogue. It was a small snippet, but he mentioned that I'm ready for dialogue, mostly with elements within the opposition. What kind of olive branch would you ask him to lay down when he's entering his
First of all, if you have studied the history of NRM, right from, say, and President Museveni, right from Nairobi peace talks and so on and so forth, LRA, dialogue he will talk about, but whether he puts it in practice is another matter altogether. Because for me, what I really think, he may have laid that out at that particular moment to appease those who were around, all these other people who were the international community, you know, because there was a lot of pressure, release Chagulanyi, the election has been bad, those sort of things. So he may have laid that one on the table just as a measure, you know, a stopgap measure, you know, for all those who are talking, you know, to give them, because President Museveni, one of the positives about President Museveni, one of the greatest assets he has in his bag is that he's a man who gives hope. At every one time, he will give hope, you know, in his speech. Whether it comes practical is a different matter. Now, for me, what I really think that he has at his disposal, it's going to be a mixed bag, you know. First of all, is you can decide, and that one you can do selectively, to ignore, you know. So if you have, say, a person, a Muhammad Segulinya, who has come and told people, vote for me, this issue of flooding in this area will come to an end. You know very well an MP cannot do much about that. So mark that one out and ensure that that place floods, you know, to contradict him. You know?
Yes.
So, and the people will say, well, you asked, you said you would do this. So you can do that selectively. You know, because you cannot come with a stick for the whole region, because what that will mean is that you're going to have more anger, more crime. Then it will be very, very difficult to administer. You know, it will be very costly. Now, the second one are the carrots. You have a situation whereby you have young men and women, many of them first-timers. There are very many people for whom it will be the first time even to get to the entire airport, you know. Now here's somebody in parliament, he's earning maybe 30, 40 million a month, and then he has all these freebies. There's a trip to Australia, there's, you know, and then you sit down on these large breakfast tables, you don't even know how to use the cutlery, you know, all these new things to you, you know. And then so you keep selecting from the group, pick one out, you know, entice them. So you end up contradicting them with their own people. The people will start, our people here are very quick, and they start saying, that one has eaten, that one has joined. So you break them down like that. And that has happened with all these parties, UPC, DP, FDC. You can even carry it even to LRA, you know. Some sweets here and there, and then people start getting, you know, agitated, you know. That is the second option he has. Then the other option that he has is to actually go all out and correct the errors, which will be very, very difficult, because that's now very, very costly. One of the biggest challenges that you have here within Buganda is the question of land, you know. How do you get people, people who were used to growing their own food? You saw here COVID-19. Yeah. It was quite monumental to see Buganda crying for posho. For posho, yes. You know, and beans, you know. We have not got, so there are very many people who observed and said, this one is rare. This is humiliation to, you know, an extent that has not, because Buganda were used to, most people say in Buganda, things like posho, that was food for migrant workers, you know. Yeah, they were used to for prisoners, migrant workers and things. But now you've got to that level of humiliation. So how do you sort those things out? Then how do you sort the issue of employment to many of these young people? Because you see, all of you seated here, except if it is part of your work, your beat. Raymond, go and cover this rally. I can't see many of you, say, waiting 4 hours for a presidential candidate to come and address you.
No.
Because you have things to do. Now, the reason the police keeps fighting all these hordes of it, because many of them actually have nothing to do the whole day, you know? After playing Ludo and here and there, doing a few odd jobs here, getting some money for a Rolex, you know, then they wait. Now, how do you put those people back into gainful employment? So you really have that challenge now, you know? So that is, it's going to be, his hands are going to be full. But the fourth one, which is at the disposal of the president, is that he can choose to go on with force, you know. We shall crush you. We shall crush whoever, and see where it goes, you know. The challenge to that is increasing, because I can see the young people these days, I've discussed this with Timothy, I see the young people these days are extremely bold. When we were growing up, it was very difficult to challenge a soldier, you know. But I see people arguing with soldiers, people have the guns, and you know, so it's got to be
fighting
with soldiers, throwing stones at them. These are things you used to, because in the days, the Amin's days, Obotetu, and all those, you actually went to school with somebody who came back to, who disappeared like for 2 weeks and came back, and the teachers will tell you, oh, be nice to that person. Why? Because soldiers had come to the home and taken his father, and he had disappeared. And you really believe that these are people who, you know, but now people, they have lost that fear. So I don't know if he comes out with all this force and he says, we crush, we arrest, because there are many arrests that have taken place. Some people have been killed, some people have disappeared, others now are still in jail. You know, some of them are winning their seats while in
From jail, yes.
Yeah. So he has that option too. So I now wait to see how he puts together a team that will come to speak to him and say, Emperor, you are actually not clothed. Look at it this way.
Timothy,
I would like kind of disagree with some of what Nicholas is suggesting. Good list is mentioned. Now, that's why, as some of us have been saying, when your time comes, I tell you, like that R. Kelly song, when a woman's fed up, there's just nothing you can do. I think that woman is now Buganda, and by wide extension, let's keep stressing, let's really say Buganda, Busoga. Let's say the whole Lake Victoria Basin area is one that's revolted. Because the reason why it's going to be difficult, the traditional way of the Cherry, select people from these communities as representatives, well, it's what he tried. You remember last year with the ghetto, he raided the ghetto, he got the Butchermans, Ashbag Katos, Catherine Kusasias, and all this, the baby cools. The idea was go get these people, give them sacks of money, and then essentially woo them. The ghetto, it just failed to work. 2016, remember when Betty Kamea had just become a minister, and she talked about delivering the president 85% of Kampala. How nice that forecast was like. You remember 2016, Seven is saying, you know, by 2021, there will be no opposition left. Not only is the opposition very much around, it seemed like doubled in intensity and concentration and determination. So if you go and you become like what he's suggesting, Nicholas suggesting, the Mama Maviras, the Betty Kameas, well, you know what happens to you. One, the president will give you this money, and I'm sure he himself is discovering all these Buganda ministers who were voted out were supposed to be that position to represent him, wiped out. Those who crossed over from the FDC to the NRM, wiped out. The Betty Kameas, Mama Mavira, wiped out. So now he now knows, and I think they themselves know, it's not helping anything. Yes, you might get them out, but then, you know, all these Subugas, when the army, the Judith Nabakovas joined the NRM, wiped out. So when this thing is so elemental, that's why I say we make a mistake of focusing on the practicalities, unemployment and all this. That's part of it's an ongoing thing. But then, as my argument has been, if it's an economic crisis, then the voting should have been NRM wins heavily in central Uganda, where the economy is concentrated, and then loses western and northern Uganda, if it was a matter of jobs, economics, poverty, and backwardness. So it's not really an economic thing. This protest action at the US Congress on the 6th of January, if you like tear apart those people you saw there, some arrived, you know, first class, others arrived by private jet. It was a protest, it wasn't poverty, but these were people, I mean, this, as I say, former Air Force pilots and all this, pure middle class, suburban, wealthy people just protesting. So this thing to me is, if I were to summarize it, isn't economic. It is just the accumulated pain, the humiliation. You can trace it back to the Buganda riots if you want to. You can trace it back to Luwero feeling they've been used and disposed, and the beginning of the rise of DP winning with Brendan Ab, Kenya woman MP for Luwero. If you want, you can go back to the land debate of 1998, and others can go back to the constitution when they had agreed. Most people in Buganda, most Ugandans had wanted a federal system. In Buganda, it was about, I think, 85 or 90 or something percent. And that's like rejected in the final draft of the constitution. You can go any number of ways, but over the last 25 years, the broad picture, when you look at it from the point of view of like an aerial vehicle, like a drone, is that Buganda, that feels it did so much for the NRM, it housed it, it bathed it, it hid them 70s. There was a brief from Mars from 86 to about 1994, the first 8 years. And after those first 8 years, then the betrayal begins with the failure of the federal clause to go through the constitution, and thereafter the beginning of the gradual humiliation of Buganda, the dispossession. It reaches one flashpoint in 2009 of the Buganda riots, then continues ever since. It's just that feeling. I mean, let's now look at the personnel, the sense of identity. You've been listening to these results coming in live across radio stations. Who are the returning officers? Everybody seems to be Akalegira, Himbisiwe, Majuni, I don't know, is it Mbabazi and whatnot, if you notice. The new RDCs, the president appointed 2 or 3 days before the election. Masaka, I don't know, Bamwine. Is it someplace, Mitiana, I don't know, Asimwe. But virtually, go just check, do a search later. About 90% of the new RDCs in Buganda, this close to the election, as I say, are the people from your Ntungamos, Fort Portals, and whatnot. What do you think Buganda feel? These people you've been seeing, the DPCs, everywhere Bobby Wine goes, everywhere these Morias go, it's all just every DPC who comes out to prevent these candidates from campaign is a what? A Himbisiwe, Asimwe, Mbabazi, Tumwesiji.
There's an actual crisis.
It is just so obvious. In fact, that's why I say we've wasted the entire hour. We should actually even apologize to listeners for wasting time trying to sound intellectual about what's something so obvious. To me, the shock is even that Museveni got 1 million votes in Buganda. But he should have got 600,000 at most. The shock for me is that there's any NRM left in here. It's long overdue.
Nicholas, very finally, your final thoughts, away from just the NRM. How does the National Unity Platform and other opposition parties, how do they now maintain this momentum within central Uganda and sort of push it over so that other regions can swing to them?
A lot will depend on what the NRM does in as far as trying to ameliorate, to correct the problem. And like I said before, it is going to be an uphill task. So one of the things is that you don't contradict yourself, which is going to be very tough. I have a very, very big fear when it comes to politicians and when they get into power in parliament and the freebies, the goodies start coming, you know, that relaxation and all this. Because what has helped NUP and FDC for a very long time, and people like the Lord Mayor and what, is to stand on the other side, no middle of the road, no, we not being wishy-washy, nothing like we can talk, we can reform it from within. Just stay on the side, be yourselves, true yourselves, continue with what you're doing, and now try your level best, and it will be very difficult to move out of the region, to reach out, you know. Because one of the things that these people who are purveying the argument of tribalism and so on and so forth, what they don't take into consideration, this was a young party. I believe if NUP and all these other opposition parties had another period of about, say, a year to go reach out and to the population, sell the idea, you have more people standing in these places, especially in eastern and northern Uganda, chances are high that the map would even have been very, very different. So
from what we saw, yes.
So now the issue is reach out to other regions, consolidate and reach out, and fight this argument that this is a Buganda issue. this is a national issue. The problems that blight Buganda are the ones which blight the same people out there. Your children don't have jobs. Look at all that. You list the jobs and you say, look at the panel there. You have Kaliejira and so on. There's only one Odom, you know. So
yes.
That sort of, you know, sell it to all these people and reach out as much as possible.
Jonathan, what does it look like for the National Unity Platform now with the support they have? How do they maintain it and how do they keep it?
First of all, we should recognize the fact that the NUP operates in a very chaotic environment, the environment where they cannot be allowed to carry out the activities. We know what happened when they were trying to reach certain places, and then you had, just like my colleague has said, it is going to be incumbent on those who have been elected into parliament and other elective positions to sell the idea of NUP. Now, when they decide to compromise their ideals and their soul to the shark, it means you'll have problems. The moment they compromise their ideals because of money, the goodies that are going to be coming in, the per diems that come with being a minister, and you know very well that when you're a minister in this government, it will take you a year and then you'll be sacked and then you go back to the streets and then you go back to the electorate and they'll vote you out. So the most important thing is to consolidate on what you have first. The new guys who have been elected to these positions because they have the mandate. Now, when it comes to the presidency, it is these young people who have been elected who will be able to sell the idea of the big man, that is Kyagulanyi, if they're so willing to do it. But if they're so focused on trying to better themselves, the money will come from the treasury and it will reach their pockets.
Yes, Timothy, in a minute, if you could turn up, what does the National Unity Platform do with the support that it has now?
First of all, there's something that needs to be told to the NUP. A large part of northern and eastern Uganda, historically since the 1960s, feels that it's been basically demonized. In other words, before this Westerners versus Buganda thing, there was Northerners versus Buganda. So many people, if you speak to those in Uganda, said the reason the North and East voted heavily for Museveni wasn't because they supported him, but it was that dread of having a Buganda as a president. So unfortunately, there's still that problem of Buganda, especially Northern, Eastern Uganda, and therefore the NUP must just be aware of that fact and do a lot, and it's going to be very important in Parliament. You know, those people you said, the Segia Mohammeds, had better leave all that drama of theirs for Kawempe and all their, you know, the local politics. When they get into Parliament, I really recommend many of them, as Nicholas hinted, let them learn how to use some of this cutlery, let them polish up on their grammar, let them begin to speak like the MPs, like the Obote's first cabinet, those Baganda, you know, the Budonians who were half of Obote's first cabinet. Let them present a dignified, polished, national image, basically. That type of people, those Muliras of the 1950s, the Musazis, then watching them debate, not always angry and climbing tables, although that's going to be there. Then is when they begin to say, okay, these people we can work with, because as I say, there's quite a bias, a lingering bias from the 60s in Eastern Uganda, Northern Uganda against Buganda. Otherwise, if it wasn't for that, had everything NUP just been without a Buganda candidate, or not a best, but another person, even an Amoriat, Museveni should have got less than 50%, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you so much, Nicholas. Thank you so much, Jonathan. We've been discussing the fourth estate, the Buganda question with Uganda, out of the presidential results and the local council 5 results that happened in the last 2 weeks. There is another election happening tomorrow, of course, the division mayor elections in different cities and municipalities, and we'll be covering that as NTV to give you a perspective of what's happening. But now, have yourselves a good evening.